Today we're talking about tough love, why it can be good when actually done right, but why very often what people imagine tough love to mean is actually something very bad. I don't know how the hell I've squeezed that into the title of this video, I don't know what I'm calling this. I am a counsellor. I guess I'm partly coming into this remembering I touched on it a bit in one of my videos criticising Dr. Phil, but I just felt it would be interesting to devote a longer video to the idea of tough love itself. So welcome. Thank you everybody for helping me reach 100,000 subscribers, by the way. As a result of this milestone, I got an artist to make a much better version of my logo, a new banner, and a snazzy intro. Snazzy is the best word I can think of to describe it. And for any of you who were there for my first attempt at a live stream, which I did recently, I hope you enjoyed it. Looking back, there were definitely quite a few issues with it, from me basically not understanding how streaming works, not knowing what I was doing, but hopefully if I do it again, I'll know better. Enough of that though, tough love. To be honest, I think there is actually one key reason I felt interested to make this video, and it's how often you come across people viewing all sorts of good parenting techniques that are known to be effective, and there are lots of research behind them. All that stuff that certain people see and go, that's just a load of mollycoddling, or they'll say it's pampering, making them soft, lots of wishy-washiness, all those kind of comments. But done right, none of this stuff is that at all. Mollycoddling is not a good thing if you're specific on exactly what mollycoddling might mean. Such an odd phrase, really. I have no idea where that word comes from. But in reality, all sorts of stuff I might talk about at any point in my channel and have in the past isn't that. Boundaries always need to be firm, behaviour does need to be addressed or acknowledged, not overlooked. There's somehow an idea that being an empathetic parent means you get flattened by your child, but I think to do effective empathetic kind of parenting, you actually need to be a lot firmer. Not stricter necessarily, but definitely firmer. I often think strictness, the strictness of boundaries is never even half as important as the firmness. You might not need many rules, your kids might be fine with a lot of freedom, however, on the things that do matter, you want those boundaries to be very, very solid. Well, let's start with a discussion of what I consider tough love to be when done right, and then we'll move on to some of the pitfalls, I guess, some of where it tends to go wrong or be misunderstood, and why all that stuff is quite flawed. I'll start with a simple story, actually. If anyone was to ever ask me, nobody ever has, I don't know what scenario this kind of question even comes up in, but if anyone asked me what was the best advice I ever received, I'd struggle to think of good advice, but I would give, I think, instead a story about something once my dad told me. He used to be a head teacher when I was young. I ended up going to the school he was head teacher of, which was an interesting experience. But anyway, I used to get in a fair bit of trouble. Mostly it was fine. Once I got an after-school detention, however, in a German class for something that wasn't my fault. And when you're, 13, 14, whatever age I was, and you're full of anger, it really, really annoyed me. Nothing, I don't think, annoys a child so much as injustice. So when it got near the end of the day, still feeling really angry about this, I went to find my dad, and I needed to find him to tell him, I'm going to miss the bus home today because of a dumb detention. Would you be able to give me a lift back home? Which invariably meant waiting a few hours after the detention was over for when he'd finished all his work and we could actually leave. But anyway, I went to tell him and I was still annoyed, and I think there was probably a bit of me hoping he might be able to do something, explain to the teacher it wasn't my fault or something. I don't know what. You think about it, of course he's not going to, that's not a good idea, but you hope it as a kid. Although having said that, I guess, some parents in that situation might have gone, this is terrible, I'm not having my son be mistreated, I'm going to sort this out. Hence, you do get lots of parents that often have a massive go at teachers over things their children have explained that happened, things they got told off for. Or some parents might go, if you've got a detention, you've got a detention, don't be so entitled to think I'll change it, and then they kind of have a go at you and call you spoiled or something like that. My dad, though, just said something like, bad luck. Teachers get things wrong from time to time. Just get yourself through the detention, then you can forget about it. And I remember being a little taken aback by that. It had been an injustice I was super unhappy about. So part of me wanted to say, no, this isn't fair, don't you understand, kind of stuff. But I didn't. I did what he said, and I think it was perhaps the best thing he could have possibly said in that situation. I guess the lesson there is, I suspect, a lesson I learned years and years before this really, but it's good to always have it embedded again, is that because someone isn't giving in to what you want doesn't mean they don't care. You can empathise with their feelings and still maintain a firm boundary. The two aren't necessarily against each other. My dad neither gave in to what I was hoping nor attacked me. He just understood I was finding it hard and that I'd had some bad luck, but if I had a detention then I would have to grit my teeth and accept it. That's difficult, but he trusts me to be able to manage it. Anyone who's following my Katie series may remember one of Katie's earliest foster parents. I think this was episode 2 of the series. The foster mom hoped that by being really nice and loving to Katie, this difficult child, that she would feel love and start to behave better as a result. So if Katie wanted chocolate from the shop, she'd get it, or give her more time to watch TV, or whatever it was Katie wanted, she would get. Maybe with enough of this, she'll start to see through all my acts of kindness just how much I love her. Except instead what happened was the foster mum exhausted herself with stress, giving more and more and more of herself until she just felt there was nothing left and eventually snapped. I think that would be mollycoddling, I suppose. I don't really like the phrase. I don't exactly know what it means, but I think that would be it. Something that with ordinary children may just make them grow up a little bit spoiled, but with more difficult children such as Katie leads to a big breakdown. I suppose the hope that plastering them with niceness can overcome all the difficulties, when really you need to recognise and accept and confront sometimes feelings that aren't easy. Niceness can't, you know what I'm trying to say. Let me give a better example. Sometimes working as a counsellor in a school, I see kids who want to test the time boundaries. You know, they enjoy having counselling, they don't want to go back to their history lesson or whatever boring stuff they're doing. Or maybe they just want to test how firm the boundaries are with me. Is this a counsellor I can walk all over, like perhaps with their parents or even teachers if this is a child they view as completely out of control? Or alternatively, is this counsellor someone who will punish and shame and attack me when I do something wrong, perhaps the way they might be used to their parents doing? So it may get to the end of the session and you'll say it's time to finish, and they'll say no and carry on doing what they're doing, or they might try to distract you by suddenly talking about something, or pulling you into a fun game and hoping you'll forget the time limit, or maybe they'll just do that I just want to do one last thing kind of tactic. Generally, I think there's 3 things I could do there. There might be more. I'm not going to think it through. But I could give in and maybe have a little half and a puff, but ultimately let them stay longer, and then probably feel annoyed they've got the best of me, which isn't great because not only does it affect the times, not only do I not then feel like someone secure who can hold solid boundaries that sometimes children need to trust, you know. Part of boundaries is trusting you as someone that can keep them safe and can help them feel in control. But also it's perhaps left me a little annoyed with this child who doesn't deserve that annoyance, annoyed that they got the better of me, and that wouldn't be great. Or perhaps I say, as teachers and parents may sometimes do, no, we're out of time, you need to go now, you've got to get going, you got to respect what I'm saying. Sort of escalating it a little, I guess, becoming more assertive and forceful. It might just make things worse, it might anger them that I'm getting so forceful about just a couple of minutes. Then they get more resistant, so I escalate further and things get worse and worse, and that's not good. So the better thing to do, what I do, is basically empathise with their feelings. I might just ask, I'm guessing you don't want to go back to class, and they might say yes, and we can have a little moment of, if only you could stay here all day, that'd be nice. The implication, of course, being that they can't stay here all day, and in body language I might lead things towards the door. Sometimes I can even playfully say things like, "I get the feeling you're trying to distract me, see if you can sneak in a few extra minutes here without me noticing," and they might pull a mischievous grin that says, "You caught me." And we have a laugh a little about that, but again, we are still out of time. It's sad, it's a shame, but that's just how it is. The firmest boundaries, I think, are the ones that not only don't crumble when the child pushes them, but also don't swing forwards and flatten them either. They just won't budge. Your attitude and care doesn't change, but neither does the rule. You don't need to become more aggressive, you remain how you are. Let's talk a little about the problems now, and then I'll come on to a few other good things that can help. I think one of the issues with tough love is that it's such a vague term that we all interpret it to mean slightly different things. My interpretation, for example, as I've sort of just outlined, is a positive but very, very specific one. Because there's so much space for personal interpretation, however, it's easy to end up justifying your own personal desires as tough love. For example, someone projecting all their shame and anger and humiliation onto their child and then just justifying that as tough love that is apparently good for them. The other problem with the term, of course, is that it sounds so appealing to many parents that anything that isn't tough love ends up being seen as soft, but as I've just hopefully made clear, showing empathy and care does not mean bending over backwards. Often I think you have to be so much stronger to uphold boundaries without resorting to any of the anger or manipulation or shaming that many regularly do. It is difficult in that sense. It's a gentler way of doing things, I suppose you could describe it as well, but it's most certainly not soft. Tough love often ends up being an excuse for abuse, whether physical violence or emotional abuse, and that's not good. And that can mean a lot of things, of course. Trivialising a child's feelings, which is not what my dad did in the example I gave, by the way. If it did sound like that, I don't think it did, but not dismissing the feelings, not branding me entitled or spoiled or selfish. The abuse can mean unfair criticism, shaming, screaming, becoming cold and ignoring or isolating them, generally being hurtful and unempathetic. All things you'll know that if one adult did to another would generally be unacceptable behaviour, and yet when it's done to a child, somehow it's seen as tough love. Are people certain, absolutely sure, that whatever they're withholding or denying or doing to their child is for their good? Are they absolutely sure this helps them, or does it more accurately fulfill their own needs? There is a thin line there, and it can sometimes require a bit of reflection to notice. I think righteousness can be a dangerous thing in that sense, as is the pervading cultural expectation that children have to respect their elders, respect their authority. I don't know, I think children trust in you like a good leader when they genuinely feel you are there for them, which sometimes does mean doing things they don't want to do or not doing things they do want to do, but if the relationship is strong, I think children most of the time can begin to recognise you are on their side, even if they're still annoyed with you and might not admit it. When I say tough love is people often fulfilling their own needs and pretending it's good for the child, that can mean projection. It can more, in a general sense, I guess, mean just venting their anger in sudden moments where they snap. People who might otherwise seem quite nice, kind parents. This is probably not the best example, but there's a man who lives near my girlfriend I once saw playing quite lovingly with his children in the communal garden. Only later, you overhear from an open window in his flat screaming viciously at his children and telling them none of you are allowed to speak at all for the next hour. That's a different example, I guess. That's not exactly suffocating his children with rigid, unfair rules, enforced negatively and claiming it's for their own good, so much as it is becoming abusive in the moments where he loses his patience, I suppose, to put it one way. It's just as bad, don't get me wrong, although you're not really measuring different types against each other. But the motivations behind it are different. Sometimes people argue in specific instances that hitting a child is good discipline. It's easy, I think. Sure, you hit them for doing a specific thing you don't like, they probably won't do that specific thing again, but that doesn't mean they won't feel rage, or fear or anxiety that might stay with them. It doesn't mean, in fact, they might not find more indirect ways to get their revenge. It might not actually improve behaviour at all. It's easier to do that. It's easier to get our own frustration off our chest, I suppose. And when I talk about all these good things that parents need to do, this is where I don't want to paint a picture that we have to be perfect. Sometimes, even with good parents, there are times of extreme stress, and when stressed and exhausted enough, when your child is having a tantrum or pressing a certain point that doesn't need to be pressed, the parent may snap. Hopefully they don't do anything too much when they snap, but they might briefly lose their temper and get a bit mad at the child. They may then feel bad about losing their temper, but the wrong thing to do then would be to defend yourself from feeling bad by justifying what you did as tough love and, well, it was probably good to lose my temper, showing them who's in charge sort of argument. And I say we don't have to be perfect as parents, because I think in situations where that sort of thing can happen, there's times a person feeling angry at themselves for losing their temper and it making them feel like a bad parent might then blame the child for making them feel like a bad parent, and therefore kind of even gets more resentful and colder, which is the opposite of what you want. Bizarre as it is in that example, I think, well, depending on the degree, but a parent has to forgive themselves. Because what they need to do, the important thing, is always to reconcile with the child afterwards. One of the difficult lessons to learn when we're young is that someone being angry at specific behaviour or annoyed at the thing we did doesn't mean that person hates us altogether. Because a parent says no over something doesn't mean they hate you, they still love you. Well, ideally they do. But when they do snap at you, you might fear otherwise. What if mum hates me now? What if I'm too bad and she's finally had enough of me? Children need reassurance that things are still okay between you. Not just telling them you love them, I think, but showing them you still love them, taking time to have a bit of fun, be affectionate, let them know it's all okay, and hopefully trying in the future to do better yourself. Rather than, for example, hold a massive petty grudge and not speak to them for ages and then offer no resolution on the whole confusing experience where you lost your temper at the bad thing they did. What lesson would that be teaching, you know? When things go wrong, foster resentment about it forever, don't try to fix things, even more so feel shame and self-hatred. So, you know, it is difficult to be perfect all the time. Stress inhibits our abilities, which is why living in the extreme stress of poverty makes things so much harder for parents. Harder than I can even contemplate unless they have really good support around them. But we don't need to be perfect, we just need to be good enough. We need to stay committed and try to help resolve things when they go wrong and try to make it go right in the future. Blocked care is worth a mention here. It's also fittingly described as compassion fatigue. Sometimes the ongoing stress is so great, and children being children sometimes reject your attempts at care, push things away. As we see in the Katie series, it's obviously more difficult to love someone who spends all their time yelling that you're mean and that they hate you. Does all that rejection stretch you to a point where, even if you want to care for them, somehow your empathy has gotten blocked and you feel a bit deadened? This is where it's really important for parents to recognise when they need support. They need a space to talk to someone about how stressful it all is, get their feelings off their chest, be told they're not a horrible person for sometimes feeling annoyed. This is the sort of thing social workers can be good for with parents, but their workload and funding isn't often good enough, or perhaps maybe themselves have been put under so much strain that they kind of have blocked care. It's difficult. Things are more likely to go wrong if parents don't have a support network around them. They don't always need it, but they sometimes do. It's also good in that instance for parents to understand seeking support doesn't mean they're a bad parent. They shouldn't feel shame for requiring help at times, because feeling that shame is exactly what stops them reaching out for help when it's most needed. I guess my general point was tough love should never ever mean a lack of empathy. Depending on how you interpret tough love, it can be a bad thing, or in my circumstances it's possible to be a good thing. You just have to be very clear on what you're doing, I think. I don't feel I've fully discussed everything here. I'm very much feeling like there's an important point I've somehow forgotten, so help me in the comments there if there is. Let's finish though with a few good things to make good tough love work better. Having a boundary works best if the child already knows the rule and the boundary before you reach the point where it's needing to be enforced. For example, the time ending in a therapy session and the child not wanting to leave and me having to enforce that rule goes a lot easier if I told them at the beginning of the session, we have 50 minutes together, that's all the time we have. When you see this clock here reach whatever time, that's when we'll have to finish. It's then, already in their minds, so you're not springing it upon them like some surprise rule out of nowhere. I think that's where things can be difficult in households where they have rules and how much a child is allowed to game when they have to switch off the console or whatever. They need to know the rule before. You can't just suddenly go, nope, you've got to switch off, we've had enough of this now. They need to know this is coming. We've made an agreement already, I guess, and then, as we're getting near the end of the session, I might point out we've got 10 minutes left. Remember, we have to finish at this time. We've got 5 minutes left. Maybe if they're about to start something really big at the end of the session, I can go, that looks a fun idea, but I'm just noticing we've only got a few minutes, so we may have to leave that until next time. I always sound so odd when I give examples of how to talk. I don't say things when I do them in these videos how I would in an actual moment. It always sounds like an odd, overly example version. That doesn't make sense. Another, perhaps, obvious but often overlooked thing that you can always do is explain why a boundary is needed. When they don't want to go along with a boundary, just saying, no, this is the rule, and asserting it stronger won't necessarily help if they feel a bit confused by the rule in the first place. Why do we have to enter that time? Why do we only have 50 minutes? Child or not, they are capable of rational thought and can have that respect of being given an explanation. Unfortunately, that's all the time I have, or unfortunately, your teacher is expecting you back at this point. It wouldn't be good for you if you miss too much of your lessons, then you'll fall behind in work and that won't be great. Or it's good to be able to trust and understand exactly how much time we have. If I gave you more today, you might feel a bit annoyed and hurt if next week I'm not able to give you as long. That wouldn't be fair, it would be confusing, so it's best to just stick to the exact same time every single week. Whatever you might want to say. If, for whatever reason, they do end up getting the best of you on whatever the rule is, maybe there's that one time, I don't know, they managed to get you to buy a toy from the toy shop when the rule you might have with your children is they only get what they can afford with the pocket money or something. For whatever reason, you end up buying it without thinking, and then you go, oh, hang on a minute, this wasn't the rule, what have I done? You might take a moment then to say, that wasn't the best of me, was it? We have this rule in place, and yet I've done the complete opposite. I've made a mess of this, haven't I? That makes things confusing for you. Now you might hope you'll be able to get things other times too, and that'll make you feel disappointed when you can't. I didn't mean for that to happen. Or maybe you can kind of playfully pull them up on it, depending on what the specific situation is. You've got a bit of a mischievous side there, haven't you? Look how you've managed to get this thing out of me despite the rule being different. I've got to be careful about your skill there in the future, kind of thing. Which is great because it's confronting, or I guess acknowledging the issue. This isn't supposed to happen, we have the rule for a reason. But it's also not hating them for it. You're reassuring, things went wrong here, but I still care for you, we'll get it right in the future. That's important. But maybe in that example, the next time they want something from the toy shop again, you can be like, do you remember that conversation we had last time? I said because you got the toy then, you'd feel disappointed next time when you can't have it, and here we are, you're feeling a bit annoyed and disappointed. You're feeling like if I bought the toy last time, why not this time? It's confusing for you. That was my fault for confusing you, but the rule is this. I need to do better to stick to it and to not confuse you. It might not feel like it's the best thing, but I believe it is better for both of us if we stick to that rule. It's all very wordy, you wouldn't say it like that in reality, but you get the point. Those are a quick few ideas. Somehow I think this turned into advice for parenting as a video. That wasn't the intention. I hope it was interesting though. I can't believe how long this video is either. I was envisioning it being a short 10-minute one. I hope you all enjoyed it all the same. Comment what I've missed or gotten wrong, like the video if you did like it, subscribe if you want more, support me on Patreon if you want even more, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as always, a special thank you goes to Janice McMahon, Luke Hoare, KrzychuKB, Michael Gallagher, In Squares, Dustin Paulson, Samara Salsi, Sharacroft2814, Joshua C. Follier and Chad Bramwell. Thank you.